As I introduced, thank you, Lori. So we've got it recorded. Let me introduce Andrew Peterson in our next presentation. Andrew Peterson is part of ISBM. He is our associate director, and he's also associate professor of marketing in the Smeal College of Business. And he got his BA with honors in economics from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and his PhD in business administration with a concentration in marketing from the University of Connecticut. Before he joined the marketing faculty at Smeal, he was an assistant professor of marketing at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And prior to entering academia, he worked as a marketing associate and web developer at SS&C Technologies. Andrew's interests include measuring and maximizing customer donor lifetime value and customer or donor equity, managing customer product return behavior and measuring the value of word of mouth, selling and sales management, and linking marketing metrics to financial performance. His research has been published in journals including the Journal of Marketing, the Journal of Marketing Research, Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, Wall Street Journal, Journal of Retailing, Journal of Academy of Marketing Science, and others. And we value this only because, again, Andrew's part of our group. So when we were asking about frameworks and learned he was developing something that we all should be using right at this moment, we're excited to be able to share that with you all directly. So I hope you'll take a look at this and have some questions afterward. If you've got questions, type them into chat or hang on to them at the end. And let me turn it over to you, Andrew.
Lynn, thank you very much. So I saw several times that people said or heard people say that this is the first B2B marketing analytics framework. I don't know, but what I do know is, this isn't going to be something new. In fact, what you're going to see, and I hope one day, Ralph, that I make your top 10, but I'll wait. But I hope that what you'll see is a lot of what I'm going to show you is a lot of the frameworks but linking those things to the analytics and the tools that you can use in those frameworks to then link to the outcomes that you want, right? Because in marketing, I think attribution is a big nightmare, trying to figure out what did I do and how did it impact something, top line, bottom line. And as I typed, how do I do that? I do it with gathering some data, doing some analytics, and knowing the right tool to apply in the right place to drive the outcome that I want. So let me share with you my screen here. And what you'll see is that I'm going to run through things a little quickly because I think that I want to give you a breadth of the power of the analytics and the types of things that you can do. I'll apologize in advance that the running example I have is, and sort of the backstory of all of this is that, I teach this marketing analytics core course here at Smeal, and all of that development went into, building this out. So you'll see a retailer example kind of flow through, but you'll see the tools in action, hopefully. So as I was mentioning, the traditional position of a CMO was sort of this framework view, right? I want to do things to build my brand or customer experience, differentiate, be competitive, so on. But more and more, we're getting into, in fact, what I need to do is I need to link those things to outcomes, ROI, profitability, revenue, and so on. And that becomes very challenging if you don't have data. But fortunately, I think there's a lot of trends going on in the marketplace. There's more data. It's coming in at higher frequency. It's more detailed information. It allows you to do all this stuff. Customers are demanding that they become more narrowly segmented. And there's all these sophisticated analytical tools out there that are helping people in terms of innovation and measurement and so on. But the challenge with all of that is actually, I don't know what to do, right? I have this data. I don't know how to mine out the intelligence from it. I get this result. I don't know how to translate it into a business decision. And that's what sort of came to what is our response? Our response to all of this was, we should write a book about this. We should build a framework. We should show how to put it in action. So a number of years ago, in fact, an ISBM fellow, Rob Palmatier, and a former colleague of mine here at Penn State, Hari Sridhar, wrote this book on these frameworks and said there's this sort of strategy framework where you can begin to think about where you can apply analytics. And the response for the book was, hey, this is great, but you didn't actually show us how to do anything. You just said there's these great frameworks and things. So I worked with Rob and another former Penn State doctoral student who's now at University of Notre Dame. And we are coming out with a book called Marketing Analytics based on first principles. And it will actually be in print sometime early next spring. But you'll get to sort of see a little behind the curtains of what's going on in the book in terms of the framework and so on, and sort of our thought process of how to link analytical tools to different marketing strategies, and then to link those strategies through these first principles that I'll discuss briefly to drive ROI, value, strategic competitive advantage, things like that. So key objectives of the whole thing, right? One is to understand these frameworks, so think what you just saw from Ralph and these processes going on, and then be able to map the tools to these things so that you can translate those insights into decisions. And the way we viewed it was that there are these key 4 principles of marketing that help you map these tools to these different frameworks. And I'll discuss those with you in just a minute. But to start, you know, all of the stuff that we do sort of goes around this process, right? That I understand what's going on. I in the marketing environment, think about that as context, right? I observe a problem. I observe what's happening. I observe a trend. Something's going on that I need to address. So I go out and I get data, and I turn that data into something I can use, information. I run some analysis, maybe a decision model, maybe a statistical model, get some insights, right, that I can turn into decisions and implement, right? And that's where sort of this framework comes in, is that marketing analytics is the key part of that. Any one of us can start at the context, the marketing environment, and make a decision. There's, you know, if I see a problem, I can look at it and go, oh, here's what I think we should do, and we can do it. The problem is, I don't know whether it's going to work or not. I have some intuition, maybe some experience going with that. But, you know, if you can make decisions based on data and analysis, you can lower the risk and uncertainty of those decisions and be better at sort of understanding why things happen, and also being able to predict or forecast what will happen. And that's where, what types of analytics are we going to look at here? Well, one is, like I said at the beginning, which is descriptive, essentially what's happening. So I gather a little information and I see some trends, or I see some problems that come out, or I look at who my customers are, right? And that's how I start all this process. And then I can apply these analytical tools to be more prescriptive, essentially trying to understand why things are happening, or predictive in the sense that I might want to forecast, right? Who's going to adopt my new product, something like that. And there's tools that then map to these. And the menu of tools that map to these are huge, right? And the tools that we're going to select are going to depend on all sorts of things. One, in terms of the data, right? So what I would call revealed preferences are things like observed data, like who bought from me when in the past, right? Those are people actually taking actions and making choices. And there's different things I can do with that kind of data. There's also survey-based data. I go out and do market research to try and figure out who my customers are, you know, maybe do, as you saw in Ralph's targeting framework, maybe figure out sort of attractiveness versus fit of my customers, maybe come up with a perceptual map. And maybe this will be good news. I'll show you what a perceptual map can look like and how to interpret it and utilize what you get out of it. You can use survey-based data for things like innovation and product design with tools like Conjoint analysis. So there's all these tools out there, and we're going to think about what kind of data do we need, and how do we map that tool to a question that we have. And like I said, we're going to do that by taking into account these 4 principles, right? These underlying principles that we're going to argue are the key tenets to this framework. The first being the assumption that all customers are different, right? So no matter who we have in our customer base, that they're going to have some different preferences, some different buying patterns, needs, responsiveness, whatever it is, and that we're going to have to understand those differences as we develop our, segmentation, targeting, positioning type of framework. The second is that all customers change. And so we're going to have to be able to understand not only and predict what they're going to do, but understand dynamics over time, right? How does industry trends and things and market trends change? The third is we're not alone here. No matter what we do, we have competitors that are doing things as well. So how can we analyze or predict or understand how our competitors might react to, say, product innovations that we do, so that we can maintain and manage our sustainable competitive advantage. And the last principle being that we don't have unlimited resources, so we need to understand how we can make trade-offs between different actions we want to take and where we're going to get that ROI from, right? And if we think about these principles as sort of solving the problems, then we can put them all in a framework, we can link the tools, and then we can take some actions, right? So to just quickly jump a little deeper into these principles to give you a sense of what we're doing, and then we'll look at the framework, and then I'll show you a bunch of examples of the framework in action. So the first one, the idea here about all customers being different is that it doesn't matter whether you have a commoditized product. Think the idea of how can we possibly sell water as a differentiated product, to the fact that there are tons of smaller and smaller segments out there in different markets. So what we want to do is that we want to build value by targeting the right segment who values what we have with the right message, right? So that we can extract value from them, as Ralph sort of showed you with the value salami, as I think he calls it. How do we do value-based pricing? Well, we find the segments, we target the right segments, and then we create a message that resonates with them so we can create value and in turn obtain some value in return, right? So that's the idea that if all customers are different, we need a segmentation, targeting, and positioning strategy to manage that. The second one being that all customers change and customers' needs change over time. They might have trigger events, right? There might be, a merger and acquisition that happens. Maybe there's an industry or market trend that's changing things. Maybe COVID hits and you have to change your digital strategy and how you're connecting with customers through different parts of the customer journey, right? This set of heterogeneity and dynamics are important to understand in terms of change. So we need some tools that'll help us with forecasting and prediction and understanding why people make the choices that they do so that we can be able to respond effectively and predict what will happen. The third one about competitors reacting, right? Anything that we do to innovate can potentially be copied, right? The simple innovations, they aren't really innovations, but the simple things we can do to sort of change the market are things like repricing strategies, right? Trying to adjust our cost strategy to reprice our offering. And that's usually the easiest thing for other firms to copy. What we might want to do is also think about innovation strategy. How are we going to develop new products and service offerings that are going to give us this strategic advantage? Things that will create barriers that are harder for others to copy in the long run and give you more time to have superior financial performance. But what matters is that you have to be innovating on products and services that customers value, right? So how do I figure out what they value? How do I understand how my product, when it comes to market, might take certain amount of market share or profitability? Will it cannibalize my other products? Those kinds of questions are things we can answer with tools like conjoint analysis and diffusion models and so on. And the last one being that certainly we're limited in our resources, so we want to think about a dollar being spent in one channel or through one thing that we're doing versus somewhere else. So what are sort of the ROI trade-offs of this? And how do we balance our efforts across these different parts of the framework, right? Whether we're in terms of trying to put emphasis in creating finer grained segments or strategies around acquisition, expansion, and retention and customer value, so customer lifetime value, or how do we spend on different parts of the marketing mix being those 4 Ps that you heard Ralph talking about: product, place, price, and promotion. So all of these things come together, and this will sort of be the first view of this framework we have, which is, if you think about those first 2, right, at the beginning of all of it, you're thinking about what is my offering going to be and how am I going to bring it to market? So I need to know who these different people are in the market. I want to engage in some degree of segmenting, targeting, and positioning, right? So that I can, out of this, once I understand these different customers, how do I create a positioning statement that's going to resonate with the segment that I want to target? The other side of it is, I'm going to also look at the dynamics of customers through different parts of the life cycle, right? Acquisition, expansion, retention, churn. Where are people in these different parts? What are the values of these customers? Can I predict how are they going to respond to my marketing efforts? And these kinds of things, where understanding that customer dynamics over time will help us with our acquisition and how do we balance our resources across acquisition and retention efforts and expansion efforts, so that we can, get the most out of our customer base, right? I oftentimes teach a CRM, customer relationship management course here, and oftentimes I call it the leaky bucket problem, right? You have customers in this, the water in the bucket is your customers. There's a hole in the bucket, and you have to think about the value I get is in that bucket. How do I plug the hole with one hand to try and minimize the churn that's happening, and at the same time, with the other hand, try and put more water in the bucket, right? And over time, balancing that effort between the two keeps your bucket more filled than if you overemphasize too much on one end or the other. Once I do those things, like understanding, what positioning statement I have and what customers I'm targeting, I can think about building and innovating new products and services that are going to be attractive to those valuable customers and bring the right statement to them. This will give me my sustainable competitive advantage. And it'll also help me with my brand offering and relationship strategies, which will in turn help me understand how I should evaluate resource trade-offs, right? Different types of ways that I can think about, you'll hear terms like understanding price and advertising elasticities and things, and how $1 spent in one place might trade off on something else. And that's going to help me with my planning and budgeting and metrics that I develop, so that I understand sort of what I'm going to get out of these actions that I'm doing. So this is sort of the first view of this integrated framework. Now, once we have start with this and we say, all right, now we have the framework, we know what we want to accomplish in these different spots. Can we begin to think about what are the requirements to be successful in these different categories? What's the data that I need? What are the tools at my disposal? How do I draw insights from those analyses that I do that I can bring forward to the next step, right? And that's really, I think, where the benefit of this textbook we wrote is that how do we map the tools to the strategy that leads us down this path to sustainable competitive advantage and higher ROIs and profitability. So what I'm going to do now is I just want to spend some time just showing you in these different steps what's possible, right? So as I said, I'm going to have a running example where we have, there's the retailer example that I came up with for the book is actually, it turns out it's the name of the neighborhood, the subdivision that we live in. It's called Chestnut Ridge. So this is Chestnut Ridge is going to be our company, and we're going to go through the process of looking at how they solve these different problems with what tools and what sort of analytics do we have to help us generate these insights. So to start, if we look at that top left, we're going to start with thinking about who are our customers and what different segments are in the market and how do we actually figure out who do we want to go after. I think of segmentation as putting people in buckets where we want to maximize in-bucket similarity and maximize across bucket differences. The second is prioritizing which buckets we go after, and that gets to Ralph's point about we're going to look at 2 dimensions, which is attractiveness and fit, and we do something called discriminant analysis for that. And the third is, can we actually see how sort of take people's perceptions in their mind and put it on a page and say, this is what people think of us, this is what people think of the other competitors, and this is where the demand in the market is, so that I can understand where I want to be on that map and how I can position myself successfully. So segmentation, as we said, is all about trying to say, here's the market we want to target. So we segment according to things like needs, preferences, responsiveness, and then we're going to use the descriptors, think firmographic type things, size of company, industry, those kinds of things, as the descriptors that might be helpful for us to profile these companies. And we'll determine things like how many segments are in the market and what do they look like and which ones are attractive to us, right? So, and what's important here is we're going to look at what we call the bases for segmentation, and we're going to try to do the most we can to segment based on either what people perceive in terms of their preferences or what people do, like looking at their behaviors, what have they bought in the past, so on and so forth. Because never, I guess I would generally say never segment based on demographics or firmographics. You segment based on the things people do and the things people say they're going to do, and then you profile them based on their demographics, right? I'm very different than somebody next to me who lives near me. I'm also different so spatially, but I start to, if I say I like these things and someone else does, that's starting to get something closer to a segment. So what we did is we had this data and we said, we know all about these customers we have, and so let's segment them, right? So once we do that, we can then decide on our strategy. Do we want to go after all the segments and be undifferentiated? Probably not, unless we have a product that's appealing to everyone. Do we want to be focused and really hammer hard on one specific segment that has a lot of value and a really high fit with what we do? Or do we see the ability to serve multiple segments and be differentiated and understand what it is we can bring to segment A, B, and C? So what we did is we have this example and we sort of say, we sell all these different products across these different channels. And so we probably have these different customers. So what we want to do is we want to first figure out who these customers are, how many segments are in our customer database, and then go from there, figure out which segments we want to target and what message we want to bring to those segments. So the first thing we did is we just took the data and we said we have these 2 geographic regions that we're serving. So you can sort of see the location of our customers. What you'll see is a lot of these screenshots are going to be coming from, so the book was sort of done all in, the analytics engine of the book was done in R, which is a open source statistics program. And the visualizations, a lot that you'll see, were done in Tableau, which is a very similar tool, if you're not familiar with it, to something like Power BI. It's something that can take data and aggregate it really nicely and also visualize it very nicely. So this is a visual map of our customer base where we're looking at sort of the average size of orders of customers and where they're coming from. So we can sort of see densities of where our customers are and where the pockets of value exist. Right? And this might be helpful for us if we're doing some sales targeting planning around where we might want to allocate our investment in our sales force to target the right customers. And then we take this data and we say, great, we have these 2 sort of regional areas of customer bases that we want to see who they are. So we segment them. So we look at a bunch of their behaviors, what they bought, when they bought, all these sorts of things. And we say, let's see how many segments are in the market. So we did something called hierarchical cluster analysis. You get something that looks like this, which essentially it's called an elbow plot. And what you're looking for is where the bend in the elbow is. And where the bend in the elbow is tells you, I have about 6 segments of customers that I serve that have some different dynamics of what they buy and how they buy. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go back and say, let's look at who these 6 segments are. Right? It turns out here, this is Tableau again, just aggregating some data. We can look at things like their buying patterns, their frequencies of orders, order sizes, how many categories they buy in, channels, do they like to buy things on sale or not, product returns, how long have they been a customer, and then sort of some descriptives about how big are the segments. So this was a case where we had 2,000 randomly selected customers. What are their sales numbers and their profitability numbers, right? So these are how we segmented them, and you can see some differences. Some like to have larger orders, some order more frequently. I think that's this group, and so on. Once we have those segments, we can also describe who they are in terms of their demographics. Now this, like I said, is a retailer setting. So here we have things like age and household size and income and so on, but you could substitute these with things like firm size and industry and so on that might be useful firmographics to get to know who these different segments are in terms of their profile, right? So this will help us with discriminating who these different customer segments look like and going out and finding them somewhere, right? And lastly, we can link this to the top line and bottom line value of these segments. So we can see their sizes, their relative sizes, their sales generations. We can start looking at sales per customer, profitability, if we include things like the efforts we do to target them, and then link that to their profit, right? So what we see here, if I were sort of thinking about that, who do I go after? Well, certainly larger segments are attractive, right? Because that gives me opportunity to target a bigger group, but also I might be interested in profitability. So it kind of looks like segment 5 here is pretty big. It's also, per customer pretty profitable. Segment 4 is actually not profitable at all. Segment 3 is huge, but it turns out not as profitable. Segment 1 seems to also be pretty profitable per customer and pretty sizable, right? So we can start to think about, as Ralph said, 2 dimensions we want to look at. One is more of our external strength, right? How big is the segment? How is it growing? What are its margins and volumes? And also internally, right? Access, channels, brand, reputation, things that fit to the needs of that customer base. Are they buying the things that we want them to buy? Once we do that and we pick the target, the right segments, we need to think about what message we're going to bring to that audience, right? Think of positioning as a way to get some space in someone's mind, right? People perceive things about your brand, about your company, about your product offerings. How are their perceptions about your offerings compared to competition? So we found, and you'll see the creative naming, a bunch of competitors, and we did a survey of what people perceive of them on all these different attributes, and then asked people about their buying patterns of who they might buy from. And what you can do with that is you can think about what are the key factors that differentiate me, right? What are the attributes that help me sort of say, here's what I'm good at, and do customers buy into that? And then come up with positioning strategies to sort of occupy that distinct spot in the market. And lastly, put that on a page so I can say, here's this perceptual and preference map that might be useful for me to tell a story of where we are and where we want to be and who our key competitors are. So like I said, we took that data of different competitors, different attributes that we want to differentiate on, and the demand from the customers, where they want to go to make their purchase, to sort of map it. And this is an example, again in Tableau, of this kind of perceptual and preference map. And the way we look at this is you can see these different attributes that people value for what the different retailers in this case offer: customer service, product quality, convenience, and so on, where the blue lines represent the attribute that we want to or that someone wants to differentiate on potentially. The orange dots represent the different retailers. You can sort of see the creative naming of these different retailer names, A, B, C, D, and so on. And then there's us, Chestnut Ridge. And the blue dots represent where people's preferences are, right? So where you see large collections of blue dots, we can say there seems to be a lot of people who want product variety and good in-store experience at the retailer. We're sitting over here, so people think that we're pretty convenient and they think that we have pretty good product variety, not so much good in-store experience. So maybe rather than competing over here with retailer E for not many customers, we might want to think about repositioning ourselves over here somewhere where there's a lot of demand, and we'll maybe be fighting more with retailer D. But in that case, we figured out is how do people think about us? And in turn, can we get some share of the market as a result? So this is the kind of maps we can draw that help us understand where we sit in the minds of customers. So that's really sort of that first box is what can I do and what tools do I have for segmentation, targeting, and positioning that'll help me understand the differences in my customers. That second tool on the bottom left, or the second box, the principle, about all customers change. So we need to understand dynamics and choices of customers so that we can actually, sort of think about if we do this, what might happen. And so we have models that we use for things like predicting choices, who's likely to buy what and when, and how much are they likely to spend, and so on. And then we can link it in the long term to things like, how do we actually measure customer lifetime value? What is the distribution of our value of our customer base, right? So choice models, one example, as we said, or as I showed you on the last slide, is logistic regression. And it's all about looking at attributes and past behaviors to try and predict who's going to take what action, right? So it can be used as a predictive modeling to sort of say who's going to buy next using people's attitudes, intentions, past behaviors. It can look at important drivers for how people make choices, sort of explaining why people choose our product versus something else. It can also be used as an input to segmentation, right? So we can do all those things with this type of model, which will help us either predict or understand why people are doing things. So as an example, say you want to run a marketing campaign, and you could send out Salesforce, or in this case, we do a direct marketing campaign to everyone. And that's what I would sort of refer to as the spray and pray method, right? Send everybody everything and hope it sticks. But instead, what if we became more targeted and decided who we wanted to target and sent only the effort towards those who are more likely to purchase and knowing what they will purchase, right? So we have an example here where we look at sort of what are the values we can generate, right? So the average people buy when we run this campaign, maybe we can, look in our data, we can see what our margins are, we can see what it costs us to deliver product and so on, and how much it might cost us to reach out to this customer. And these numbers will vary based on what sort of marketing actions you want, as well as what you're selling and what your margins are. But with this information, we can sort of figure out what we would call a break even, right? So how much I'm spending relative to how much I'm getting on the average customer. And what this tells us, this break even tells us, is when we predict the likelihood that you're going to buy, and if on average this is what you're buying and these are our margins, that we should target anybody who's likely to buy more than 15.6% of the time. And if we do that, how does that change our result? Right? So we have the same data from this company. We have this campaign that was sent out to 10,000 people, and we wanted to sort of measure what happened and use our logistic regression choice model to predict who was likely to buy based on all sorts of past behavioral factors. Turns out when we do that, what we can see is if we do the spray and pray method, right, we can do all these calculations and figure out that we sent to 10,000 people, we got about 1,800 purchases. We sort of figured out that based on our revenues and our costs, that we walked away with about 2,800 in profit, which is a return on our marketing of about 13%, right? That's the 2,700 divided by 20,000 that we spent on marketing. Instead, what if we only went to the people that actually were likely to buy? Well, it turns out we target a lot fewer people because there's a lot of people that might not buy. So we only target about 40%. We got a lot of the buyers, right? But a much higher response rate. And it turns out when we do it that way, we become more profitable because we're now taking away resources that are being wasted and we can divert them elsewhere. And we end up with a much higher return on our marketing investment. So this just says that if I can understand who's likely to buy, I can target the right people at the right time with the right message and be much more profitable and have a higher return on my investment. So these are very short-term measure, right? If I want to run a campaign and do that prediction. In the long run, I can think about not just the likelihood of someone purchasing from us, but I can think also about if they buy, what do they buy? How much do they buy? How much budget do I have? And how much can I allocate it across different people? As well as I can think about the value of these customer relationships. We like to think about, in these very relationship-based settings like B2B marketing, that if you're transactional, you're trying to get value out of every sale. But if you're relationship-based, you want to look out to that whole relationship with this customer and maximize the value over that entire relationship. Well, that entire relationship is a bunch of spending, right? They're going to spend money with you over time, and they might stick around, they might leave. This is sort of the retention. The time value of money is right here, but essentially saying, what's the net present value of all of these future profitable purchases sort of summed up today? That's this customer lifetime value. And so what I can do is I can plug in different parts of this using that logistic regression as one of my tools, as well as some other, linear regressions and things. I can build all of that out and I can calculate lifetime value. So this is that same data of those 10,000 people from my data that I was going to target using my, campaign. And we measured the customer lifetime value of each of them, looking at the expectation that they're going to stick around, what they're likely to spend, as well as, how profitable they are, how likely are they to leave the relationship. And we did a decile chart, and we show that, your top 10% are actually extremely valuable relative to the rest. And usually this is how a lot of these customer lifetime value charts look, right? That there's, 80 to 90% of, that percentile creates the majority of value. And you have some sort of people who have a little value, and then you have people who have negative value often. And so now, if I do this, it can help me also with beyond just who do I want to target, but maybe I can now go to these valuable customers and talk to them about inputs for that next process, inputs for innovation, right? Inputs for, my budget and planning process, right? So that's the power of customer lifetime value if I'm able to calculate it on my customer base. So that's those first two tools on the left and what I can do in terms of the analytics around those tools. What if I then say, all right, I've figured out who my customers are and I figured out what they value. Now I want to think about how do I innovate, right? So what are my inputs for new product innovation and how do I price that innovation? What are people willing to pay? How do I forecast the innovation and decide whether it's worth innovating or not? And then how do I know how, if I do things like changing prices and changing other things that I do in my marketing mix, how do I know how that will affect myself as well as competitive effects to myself? So we'll quickly look at these three things. So we're going to look at conjoint analysis for new product innovation. How do we forecast, or what do forecasts look like and how are they useful? And then what is a marketing mix model kind of trying to get at us? So innovation is a very important thing, and there's a lot of ways you can innovate, right? Many parts of your offering. This is the name kept popping up in the last session, but this is a framework put together by Sani on Innovation Radar, and you can think about, do I innovate my offering? Do I innovate on customers, process, presence, and so on? And there's lots of examples of things that I can do in all of these different sort of buckets, and how I decide what's on my innovation radar is going to be somewhat what my customers value and somewhat what my firm capabilities are. Where do I bring value to the market? Am I very good at delivering customer experience, in which case I might rethink how I interface with my customers? Or am I good at building solutions, right? And I might think more about how do I bring together different categories of products and services to build a solution type offering. But I want to think about what are my customers valuing and what it is that I can actually do to innovate on those different dimensions. So How do I do that? Well, one thing I can do, there's this wonderful tool called Conjoint analysis that allows you to sort of build these hypotheticals and understand how people make trade-offs between these different things that you're innovating on, where you can simulate out what might happen in the market. It's really a nice tool for beginning of stage gate innovation, where you can sort of as an input say, here's where we want to start. Here's what we think people value. Now let's talk about how to bring this to market, right? And the way Conjoint sort of works is the following, right? Suppose I want to develop this new smartwatch, right? This like an Apple Watch kind of thing. And do I decide that I want to innovate this tool or this product? Or do I decide that I want to partner with somebody in the market to bring it into my, as sort of like a value-added reseller? So do you manufacture your own, or do you partner with someone? Well, you might want to know what people value, and you might want to know whether or not your brand attached to this product can actually deliver value to different customers. So you run a conjoint analysis. You maybe come up with some different attributes like brands and different features of your product, in this case, shipping costs and restocking fees, but you could also do attributes of the product, what features it has and so on, and what price you're going to set, right? And then you go out and survey potential customers in the market for this product. And you can build things like, for instance, here, after surveying 100 customers in the market who are interested in smartwatches, we figured out what attributes they value. Turns out for this group, price was the most important driver. It was worth about almost 30% of the attribute total importance. Brand was actually pretty low, which maybe gives us the idea that we can bring our own brand to market and it won't hurt us too much if it's an unknown brand. The second thing we can do is we can actually go through and based on people's responses, figure out their willingness to pay for these different features, right? How much are my customers willing to pay if I give them a longer return window? How much are my customers willing or less willing to pay if I charge them a shipping cost, right? So you can calculate these willingness to pays, which can be helpful in sort of designing what features to add or not add to your product, so that you, and if you do add them, what value-based pricing you can do based on how much they're willing to pay for this feature. And the last thing you can do is you can actually hypothetically say, what's the market, right? Currently, this is what's going on in the market. There's Apple, Samsung, Fitbit. And what are the market shares? Well, we can take this data, we can take the survey respondents, and we can generate market shares based on different choice rules, right? Here it sort of says, you know, using what's called a first choice rule, or that people only buy the product they like the most, then we would estimate these would be the market shares. Yeah, 30% for Apple, 55% for Fitbit, 15% for Samsung, based on those features. But what if we then brought in our own product, right? So we'll add our product to the list. What happens then? Who do we cannibalize share from? How much share do we actually get? Well, again, Conjoint's a nice tool where we can generate proposed market shares based on what happened. Well, it turns out if we bring out our product with those features, we actually get a good chunk of the market share. This is a hypothetical situation. And who do we pull from? Well, if we went back here, we see that Fitbit was really big. Now we see that Fitbit is about 30%. So we actually were able to, out of our 30% share, we're taking away from Fitbit the most. So it sort of suggests that the product we created is going to compete most heavily with Fitbit, and that we should be most likely to expect some competitive reaction from them if they're the ones most likely to be cannibalized, right? So that's sort of the power of Conjoint as a tool at the beginning of the innovation process, is that you can think about what attributes to drive people's purchase decisions, what hypothetical products can I make, how do people value these different attributes, and if I built the product, sort of what is the value-based pricing approach to setting and executing on that price. Once I do the conjoint and I say, hey, I want to come out with this product, I think I have an opportunity to get some good share. Is there still a market left for me, right? What is sort of the future potential for this market? So we maybe could do something like a BAS diffusion model, where we say, given what we know about this category of smartwatches, what's happened in the past, and can we expect this market to continue to expand, or is it contracting, or what's going on? So we went out, I went out and I gathered real data on, these are sales in millions of smartwatches from 2014 when they first appeared on the market to a little bit right before everything started in COVID last year. And these are the sales, like I said, in millions across these different quarters. Turns out we can plug them into a vast diffusion model, and we can actually look at the sales over time, right? So the orange represents the actual sales, right? You can see they kind of bump up about every fourth quarter because people buy smartwatches seasonally, right? A lot of gifts around the holidays. But what the diffusion model will do is it'll create a smoothing of the line, and it will project out sort of the peak of sales over time and when it will decline. So we can actually see that less than half of the market for smartwatches by early 2020 had actually been realized, and there's still a lot of room left to grow. And if we can capture 30% of what's over here, maybe there's a great opportunity for us to really get a lot of share of the market and to have some justification for the investment in sort of bringing this product to market. We can also sort of look at if this is sales per period, this is cumulative sales, right? So we could also sort of see how good our model is at actually predicting cumulative sales and where it's headed. So it looks like the estimation of this model is that the total market size for this generation of smartwatch seems to be about 450 million units worldwide. And so we're about just under 200 million units of the way there. And there still seems to be this quite a bit of opportunity left ahead of us to realize. The last bit of this section in terms of sort of understanding, so whereas Conjoint and the diffusion model are probably more about new products, what about current product lineups? And how do we understand how we might change marketing mix decisions around those products? So we want to roll out this smartwatch, but we wonder if we can utilize information from our past in terms of how we priced and promoted and sold things of different products that might be analogous to this. So it turns out we had a line of high definition televisions we've been selling the past few years. So we could look at in the past, how did our price affect our sales? How did our other marketing tools affect our sales? And how might those elasticities we get help us understand how we want to set and execute on these marketing mix variables? So I pulled a bunch of data. So this is actual real data from a company where we see spending across different channels, digital channels of digital advertising and digital search, print marketing. You can see here that the decisions in print were done once a month and then allocated across the month evenly. You see TV advertising, and then you see variations in price. The price of this TV ranged between when it was on sale around $200 to regular price, it was around $350. So what we're going to do then is take all the variation of all these things, plug it into a model to predict sales and see how we do, right? So we do that. Turns out if we compare our predicted versus our actual sales numbers, we actually do quite well. You can see here that the predicted numbers are in blue and the actual are in orange. We seem to have built a model using that information that does a good job of explaining how much we're selling. It also does a good job of explaining revenue numbers, right? So now we have something we can use as a tool that will say, if we were to change the price, or if we were to change our advertising or our marketing strategy or our sales strategy in a different channel, what do we think will happen, right? And that's going to help us. So these are the tools that we can use in terms of new product development, forecasting new product sales, as well as understanding elasticities and trade-offs of current sales efforts that we have. The last principle of the thing has to do with the fact that resources are limited. So we can use all of these things that we were talking about here as inputs to these trade-offs, as well as on top of that, looking at things, so for instance, allocating resources such as advertising or sales effort is something that we can think about those trade-offs. Those elasticities that we get from the marketing mix models are great at helping us understand trade-offs. Something I haven't said yet, running experiments at natural field experiments are a great way to measure causality, or if this, then that. We can also think about innovative ways of cost savings around market research. So I'll quickly show you an example of how to capture data from, say, scraping product reviews and understanding what people are saying about our products. So experimentation, the one thing I won't say much about elasticities here because that was in, sort of part of the last, but the two others, experimentation is important in that it helps us evaluate consequences. So if I can design a good experiment, I can actually understand how, say, if I, create a new marketing campaign, how effective is it really, right? And why that's important is that things like running advertisements and doing sales promotions and targeting customers are all very strategic. And the problem is that it's very hard for me to know what would have happened had I not done anything, right? How would my sales have changed if I didn't do advertising? Well, I don't necessarily want to go to a market and not do advertising, right? So how do I actually uncover that effect? Whereas maybe there's just a growth trend in the market that could be causing this sales increase, and it's not really my advertising at all. So what we want to do is design some experiments, right? We want to design an experiment such that we see that changes in what we do cause an effect, right? So if I increase my advertising budget, it increases sales. When I don't do it, or when I limit my advertising budget, I should not see that growth in sales, right? So that sort of helps me control for what that sales increase is coming from. I also want to see that what I do today affects tomorrow, because if it happens simultaneously, it's hard to explain what caused what. And the hardest one is that nothing else might have caused this. Maybe a competitor left the market and my sales went up. Well, then it wasn't really my advertising at all. And how do I get around this? Repeated experimentation, running a bunch of studies that can get to the bottom of this. And how do I design an experiment? Well, ideally, randomization, right? So that I might say I'm gonna flip a coin every time someone shows up, and either you get this or you get the new thing or you get the old thing. Or if I can't do randomization, I do what's called matching. And there's a wonderful chapter in our new ISBM B2B Marketing Handbook, 2nd edition, coming out that talks about exactly how to do this and how to design those experiments. But in a sense, very quickly, the idea is that suppose I can choose a sample of my customers and I can sort of flip that coin, who gets the new and who gets the old, right? Whereas they all had the old before, and I see what they did. Now this group over here gets the new, this group sticks with the old, and I can see the difference. And then I can measure what's called the difference in difference, or the lift in our sales, to figure out the effectiveness of the advertisement. That's the ideal approach to experimentation. If I can't do that, then I have tools at my disposal, things like propensity score matching and things that I can use to match different groups so that I can uncover some sort of causality. The last tool that I want to quickly show you before I wrap up is, what if I can go out and I can do market research differently, right? There's all sorts of new data out there. There's text data, right? And I'll show you an example in just a minute with product reviews of different products. But there's text data all over the place. There's text data in our CRM systems. There's text data out on the internet. There's text data that comes from social media. All these new digital tools that we're using are generating a lot of text. They're also potentially generating audio, right? People are doing podcasts and things where you can capture information from audio. You can capture information from videos and imaging. And you can capture information from the dynamics of different customer networks and maybe supplier networks. And those could be very interesting as well. And that you need some tools to help you distill this information into measurable things that you can then analyze. So what I'm going to quickly just show you is an experiment we did with text using that same watch innovation example, right? One thing we could do to figure out what people wanted, if you think about that conjoint analysis example, is I could ask people how they valued different attributes. I could survey them, right? I could go out and say, tell me, would you rather buy product A or B? And ask people a bunch of different questions around their intentions. Or I can go out and if it's out in the market, I can say, hey, I'll just go scrape all of the product review information for this product and link it to people's ratings of the product. and learn what the conversations are about and link those conversations to successes and failures. So I went out and did that. I learned some lessons. I learned that Amazon finds you out very quickly if you try and scrape their data, but I got some data from them. So I went and looked at all the reviews of the Apple Watch, scraped about 5,000 reviews at the time from it. And you can see mostly people like it, but you get a rating, you get a review. That text is very interesting. So you plug that into a topic model that sort of extracts the different conversations that are going on. You link it to the ratings, and you can begin to find out which topics, in this case, there were 57 topics, are more likely driving positive things, and which topics cause negative things to happen. And we can look at word clouds then. So we created some word clouds. We can see here that the people who rated highly talked a lot about loving the product, and a lot of times for a gift. You can, if you look closely, it says sort of, I gave it to my daughter, my wife, my grandmother, and so on. It's this tough product that's, you know, they love it. This one was about price a little more. It had a little bit of leftover from this one, but that it was a good price and that they got good value. You could think of that as the price generated value. The third positive topic was talking about all the things it can do, right? It can text, it can be a phone call, it can give me notifications, I can get messages without having to look at my cell phone, right? So you can start to see here why people are buying it and what they value in the product without doing any survey. All I did here was data scraping and topic models. I can then look at the bad things. Well, it turns out the screen cracks easily and it's hard to fix. This one is because I scraped the data from Amazon. This one says support at Amazon was terrible. Return was not very good, and so on. This one says, I don't like the new charger of this thing, right? Maybe this would help you with some product design issues and so on, right? So you can see here how linking these topics to the outcomes helps you understand attributes. It helps that people value things about the product that are perhaps failing in the market, right? All from just scraping some data. We didn't even have to survey customers. So all of that being said, because I know my time is almost up, and sort of coming back to this overall framework, what this was supposed to do is it's take all those frameworks, like what you saw Ralph show you of his top 10, but take those frameworks and think about how do I begin to map data and tools to each of those steps of the framework so I can build out a strategy by understanding differences of customers, understanding the dynamics of them over time as it affects my positioning statement to the market, as well as my strategy to target and acquisition and expansion and retention, how to build a better product to create sustainable competitive advantage, how to have a better brand and offering and relationship strategies that help me understand trade-offs of my resources so that I can maximize ROI, and set my marketing plans and budgets and metrics that I measure and evaluate, right? Put that all together, and now I have data-driven, analytics-based marketing strategy that can lead to positive outcomes around sustainable competitive advantage and around ROI that I can actually attribute to the things that I'm doing as a marketer. Last thing I want to say about it, this is as I think Ralph did a great job of saying as well, no framework is just, I hand you the framework and it's over. The process is hierarchical. You sort of have to start on one end to go to the other. It's dynamic, right? At times you'll see static, sort of my customer base looks the same, but at times you'll see the evolution of them and the differences. And it's iterative, which means you have to be continually innovating and gathering new data and applying those tools and learning new things so that you can continue to differentiate yourself. So I think that's it for me. So let me
All right, thanks. I'm back too. And so I didn't have any typed in questions, but I invite you, if you'd like to ask a question directly, you can unmute or raise your hand. And I'm going to give you a chance before I ask mine. Let everybody just take a second. Okay. So I was a little bit over, I'm thinking about it as I was doing, like when I lived in the space, right, that everybody else is, and thinking, okay, I know where I get that data, and I kind of know where I'd probably find that data. But I found myself in some places thinking, oh, I don't know that I would have had that. And so when you say it's hierarchical, what happens if you have a hole every now and then in the data that you want?
So starting on the far left, the bottom left you have, right? That's customer transaction data, right?
Yep.
You should have that, I hope, right? And that's the part where you sort of say, what do I know about what people are buying from me? And what is the sort of this relationship evolution look like? Those are the things I can do. The top left, if I don't have them, that's where you do the segmenting, targeting, and positioning stuff. You saw, I think, in some of Ralph's frameworks, where you go out and you talk to customers, do voice of the customer, figure out what they're all about. If they're in your customer database, you use their information to help you segment them. If they're not, you survey them. And then that helps you understand that, that targeting framework of who do I go after and which one do I want to go after, in that case with positioning. That stuff is up front. Once I do that, then I get into new product innovation, R&D, and sort of not just, can I build a better product, but can I build a product that my valuable customers value? And when I bring it to market, can I understand the best way to make investments in that product so that and service offerings so that it maximizes ROI and profitability? So I think that's the hierarchical part, is first, know your customers. Second, once you know who's valuable and who your customers and who your segments and that, how do I bring it to market and how do I make smart marketing investment decisions? And I think the general answer is you have more data than you think you have. Oftentimes, when I started doing a lot of this research 20 plus years ago, the question was always, where can I get this data? And now when we talk to a lot of companies, the question isn't where's the data, it's I got all this stuff that I measured, what do I do with it? And we're sort of helping them sort of map here's the information we know to here's how I utilize it and draw insights and make decisions about innovation, about marketing spending and things like that. So I think you have more data than you think you do. If you don't, you have customers you can talk to. And I think B2B more than B2C, you have customers who want to talk to you. And I think those are useful inputs to this whole process.
Okay, and we have one more. Can you speak to B2B companies that sell indirectly and how they would be able to execute a marketing mix model?
So selling indirectly, I'm only assuming to mean you sell through an intermediary of some sort, like you would be a manufacturer selling through a retailer to an end consumer.
Or a distributor, right?
Yeah, the answer is yes. There's also, I've done research in that space on both sides of people selling direct to consumer as well as people selling through channels. I think none of the tools change. It's just the data you have access to changes oftentimes. And the focus then doesn't become, it's understanding end customer sort of derived demand is important as an input to the process, but it's more about channel relationships and channel values and who you should be selling through and how do they value the product and what can you do to serve them better, knowing that you can come to them. And in fact, many times what we see, like if we go talk to P&G, they'll say, okay, we're going to sell through Walmart. How do we make the right value proposition to them? And the answer is, well, when you go to them, tell them about their customers and who's buying and what they're going to buy and what they value, and they'll be more likely to, stock certain assortments of products that you have because of your knowledge of the customer that was an input to the relationship.
Yeah, you have to manage it all the way through. I see that Ralph has a question, and I kind of know where that might go. So I want to say this first before Ralph asks you this question, Andrew. At the next moment, when we're done with this, we're going to be doing our chocolate and coffee tasting, and we're going to have some information given to us about that. So I want to let everybody know that you need to get your coffees and your chocolate ready for the next 5 minutes. And then Ralph's going to ask his question, Andrew's going to answer it, and everybody else is gathering their stuff. Go, Ralph.
All right, I'll just be really quick. Andrew, great presentation. I think one of the things that, it may be just inverting some of this is that if you've got this, do you know that you could find out that? There's many, many times that it says, well, like that. And if I had this data, what could I find out? Or, with these analytic tools, if you have this data, you can answer these questions. So I think in some ways, leading with the questions you can answer with these and clarifying that is almost a really important service, because it's not always clear. So do you realize you could get an answer to this question? Is there more space in this market if you ran a BAS forecast model? And here's what you would need. So
that's exactly how the book is written. So the book is written.
Well, good. Well,
the
then I think
chapter starts with, here are the questions you can answer. And then it says, here's the data and tools you need. And then here's an example of how to do it, essentially.
Okay, well, you can go get chocolate now, and you can send me that 50 you owe me whenever you like.
Thank you for marketing. Yes.
All right, great, Andrew. Looking forward to the book. Thanks.
Yeah, we look forward to sharing it with everybody when it comes out too. All right, so I'm going to ask you all to get your things and let you know that right now in the schedule, so this is officially a break time, so feel free to take the break if you need it. But in this break time, the folks that brought you the coffees of the chocolate, we're going to have Jeff here, and he's going to tell us a bit about it and show us some things. I'm excited for that. And we'll finish just about time before we have our next presentation. And you will not want to miss the next presentation, where Beth is going to talk to us about how Marmon did it. And then after that, we have our first ever raffle to just make sure you've all stayed with us through the day. So I appreciate it. I've actually not seen many of you drop off, but I don't know if you're there because I can't actually see you. All right. So Jeff, can I invite you to be on